Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the first part thereof for the 13th of December 2025. Sorry, this is very, very late indeed. I had to go to my son's football match all the way over in Pompey in Portsmouth, where they're playing top of the league. He's in D League. This is one of my twins. The other one didn't have a game today. He's in A League. The one in D League, playing top of the league team, they were 2-0 up. Oh, and they lost 3-2. And there was all argy-bargy, parents coming on the pitch, effing and jeffing, typical British football match, 15-year-old kids, but the parents are getting all argy-bargy. So that was fun. And then I had other things to attend to. And now I am back in the hot seat, and we're going to go through the hits and losses on the front lines and what's taken place over the last 24 hours in the war in Ukraine. And it has to be said that there's a lot to talk about, not least what's going on in Pokrovsk, who's been in charge of that, why that's been, oh no, sorry, well, yeah, we are going to talk about Pokrovsk, Kupiansk, why that's been its success up in Kupiansk, what's going on elsewhere, different strikes on equipment. We're going to talk about a huge attack last night on Odesa, leaving many, many people without power. In fact, maybe as many as 1 million people in Ukraine without power, maybe last night or remaining today. Really significant attacks by the Russians on energy infrastructure, as well as looking at a number of other things and what took place with regard to the ship that was struck in Odessa yesterday, that Turkish ship. So anyway, lots to talk about. Before we get there, of course, please remember to like, subscribe and share. It helps keep you in the loop concerning news about the war in Ukraine. Okay, without too much further ado, let's get into it. Oh, let's not. Right, here we are. 1,300 personnel lost, and put that together with over 100 vehicles and fuel tanks lost, and you can imagine that there are some serious hotspots along the front line, not least Pokrovsk and Kupiansk, but also we hear Seversk and Hulaypole is also really challenging for the Ukrainians. So don't get carried away with everything being all positive for the Ukrainians up in Kupiansk, because there are other places that are deeply concerning, although we're going to talk about that sort of relationship of those ideas in a little while. But anyway, 1,300 is a tremendously large number of troops that the Russians have lost. And the unmanned systems force is doing a really staggeringly good effort at attriting the Russian forces. 103 vehicles over that 100 mark correlates well with the personnel losses. 3 tanks and 9 armored combat vehicles, so that's all right, contextually speaking. They use fewer armored vehicles these days, relying more on SUVs and motorbikes and buggies. 24 artillery systems, that's a good number. Another 2 air defense systems. There were 3 yesterday, so really good couple of days for the Ukrainians, and 1 multiple launch rocket system. 2 pieces of special equipment to add on to the 103 vehicles and fuel tanks we talked about. So a good day at the office for the Ukrainians there. Now, talking about the unmanned systems forces, here's Magyar's Birds on Twitter saying the average daily fertilization rate of the worms for the first 11 days of December. So this is the typical rhetoric you get from Magyar's Birds. 395 bodies per day. That's already at 4,325, knock on wood. 505 worms already processed today by unmanned systems forces pilots alone. And there are still a long 5 hours left in a day. This is really sort of provocative language, which is very typical for Magyar's Birds. So really poking fun at the Russians here, treating them with maximum disrespect, but also saying, you know, demeaning their attempts at staying alive, I guess. Do not pacify them, but the Führer plan is obvious: intimidate, push through, and grab more. The main worm reserve for Donbass has been thrown in. The force that was meant to seize Zaporizhia, the entire 76th Division, and elite air assault formation, and that's exactly who we're grinding down now, grinding them down with a clear overspeed violation. 1 day equals 1 worm battalion. Okay, to translate that, and this is, if this is all true, this is quite phenomenal, that the 76th Air Assault Division, or 76th Division, yeah, is an elite grouping of forces, these paratroopers, these air assault brigades that, okay, 4 years into the war probably aren't the kind of paratroop elite forces they would have been 4 years ago, but nonetheless, they're supposed to be their crack troops, at least some of them. They were, according to these guys, supposed to be attacking in the Zaporizhia direction, but had to be brought up to attack in Pokrovsk because one assumes the Pokrovsk direction has taken so many Russian casualties. These are some really big claims here from the Ukrainians, and it indicates that the Russians don't have that depth of forces that some people might think they have. I keep telling you that both sides have very thin troop accumulations across the front line. Yeah, we keep hearing that there are huge forces accumulated in Pokrovsk, that Pokrovsk area, that whole sector there. But actually, I don't think the Russians have that huge depth, and they're having to rob from Peter to pay Paul here. And this is a really good example, taking troops that should be used and we'd heard so many rumors about Zaporizhia being the area where the Russians were going to have some major breakthrough, and they still might around the Hyderpale area. But there were so many rumors that, yeah, they're amassing forces to attack into Zaporizhia, if you remember, sort of 6 months ago. And actually, that never materialized because not in the to the magnitude that the Russians were hoping, because the Ukrainians have done such an amazing job of retreating in Pokrovsk. So you might call Pokrovsk a disaster for the Ukrainians, that they're encircled, that this and that. But my opinion is, rather like Bakhmut, the attrition rates have been so tremendously good for the Ukrainians that I think the two can be put together in the same kind of pot, which is these have served Ukraine very well. Yep, it might be hellish for the Ukrainian soldiers, and there might be rumors about being encircled, and were the right decisions made here, and are they holding on too long? But essentially, both Bakhmut and Pokrovsk have acted to fix and attrit Russian troops at levels that are quite phenomenal. Now, this is Magyar then continues to say that's all you need to know about the current pressure on the front. The Dobropilia, Pokrovsk, and Hyderpale sectors, and about the worm terror seen through the eyes and the sting of the free Ukrainian bird. And interestingly, he mentions Hyderpale there. So evidently, unmanned systems forces are also active in that neck of the woods. Quote, the main Russian reserve in Donbass has been deployed, the entire 76th Division and elite air assault unit. That's exactly who we're grinding down now at an impressive pace. In one day, one enemy battalion was wiped out, says Robert Magyar. Really successful activity from the unmanned systems forces. And you're thinking after this war, Robert Brovdy is going to be, he's going to be made a Ukrainian saint. Oil refinery in, so this was a list of things that were kind of taken up 2 nights ago. But at the end here, we hear some claims that we hadn't heard yesterday. So we did hear that an oil refinery in Yaroslavl was targeted, and that was a really major oil refinery. So that's very important. Slavnev Yanos oil refinery again 2 nights ago. An ammunition depot as well taken out near Avdiivska. But then here, enemy manpower concentration points in Myrnograd, so that's right on the front line at Pokrovsk, and Rodinsky district, which is just north of Myrnograd, to obviously try and stop the Russians encircling or having success in the Pokrovsk area. What's important here is that I think you are seeing Ukrainian drones be used to really help them out on the immediate sort of contact line in ways that I've been calling for I don't know, over a year now. The Russians have used their Shahed drones to good effect near the front lines, and you can't really do much about shooting them down with air defenses, because you can't bring the air defenses that close to the front line. I think Ukraine, if they can start bringing to bear more of these FP2 drones and whatnot into attacking really serious troop accumulations near the front, as you can see from this kind of infographic, then you're going to get an effect that's somewhat similar to the use of guided glide bombs, where Ukraine can't use as many guided glide bombs and planes as the Russians can. They can hopefully ramp up production of medium range drones and use them on the front lines. Now, Fighter Bomber, talking about personnel, has stopped collecting money for the families of killed pilots on his channel. The reason is simple, says Max25. Russian pilots died so that the channel would simply become so many Russian pilots died. I think there's some missing words there. So many Russian pilots died that the channel would simply become a continuous tombstone with the names of those killed. In other words, so he's stopped raising money for dead pilots just because there are so many. Now, I did a breaking news update on Kupiansk being cleared by the Ukrainians in the main. Oskil River, really helping in that area. I think there's some geographical factors that really helped Ukraine regain territory in Kupiansk, as well as what we're going to hear, apparently good leadership and the units working well there. Zelensky, with his kind of balls of steel, went and took selfies and gave a speech to his channels and whatnot, very close to the front lines. I mean, it really was a risky thing to do, just to sort of 1.3 kilometers, I think, from the grey zone, and not far more, well, actually, that was an area very close to Russian encircled forces there. So it really was pretty risky. Putin claimed Ukrainian forces were surrounded in Kupiansk. He invited foreign journalists to visit, says the Euromaidan press, offered a 5 to 6 hour ceasefire so they could see the encircled troops safely. And then today, Zelensky walked in freely. So the Russians evidently talking nonsense. Russian fascist, says Ilya Ponomarenko, who used to write for the Kyiv Independent, on Telegram, are absolutely losing their stuff right now, losing their heads. Kremlin Zombie TV has been ordered to start calling Zelensky the, quote, so-called president of Ukraine, as yet another act of servile obedience to Donald Trump's ramblings about elections in Ukraine. Well, that so-called president today went to the front to congratulate his troops on a major victory in Kupiansk, which Putin had already boasted about capturing weeks ago. And he met with commanders there, also met with a load of troops, gave out some medals, went to some underground bunkers and whatnot. I mean, here's a useful infographic really indicating the magnitude of what Ukraine has achieved up in the Kupiansk direction, really forcing the Russian forces not just back from Kupiansk itself, the main kind of urban area, but actually north of there too. Real success story, I think, for the Ukrainians here. Ukrainian forces, says the Institute for the Study of War, recently liberated territory, including part of the city of Kupiansk, in a tactical counterattack in that direction. It demonstrates the Ukrainian forces remain capable of defending and counterattacking against significant Russian offensive efforts, contrary to the claims of Russian President Vladimir Putin and that the Ukrainian lines are collapsing. The contours of the Ukrainian counter-proposal to the most recent US peace proposal are emerging, but details of the counter-proposal remain unclear. So before we go and look at that later, you've got to understand that these counterattacks are going to be an attempt by Ukraine to wrestle back some of the initiative and say, look, hey, it's not so desperate on the front lines. Look, we have pushed the Russians back. Don't say that we have no cards. Don't say that we have no leverage. Now, Kupiansk operation, says someone here, Yegor Loganov, was largely conceived, planned, and implemented by one of the most talented Ukrainian officers, in my opinion, the commander of the Joint Forces Group, Major General Mikhailo Drapati. Without additional reserves and with available forces and means against an enemy that is superior in almost all components. Drapati, who on May the 24th was hastily transferred to the Kharkiv region to stop the breakthrough of the Russian army from the side of Vovchansk, and he stopped it, who led the liberation of the Kherson region in 2022, who decided to resign after an accident at the training ground. So if you remember, he was put in charge of the ground forces, I think. So you got the whole overall commander in chief of the Ukrainian armed forces is General Alexander Syrsky, but they put Drapati in charge of the ground forces, I think it was. And then he took himself out from that position because there was a strike on a training ground with one of these Iskander missiles that killed a bunch of people. He said, look, I take responsibility for this. I'd asked for changes to be made. Some changes had been made, but obviously not enough. Or changes hadn't been made here, and they hadn't done what I'd asked them to do. And so I'm going to fall on my own sword here and take responsibility for that. So he took himself out of being in charge of the land forces, if I remember correctly, and then is evidently still in charge of whichever grouping, obviously the Kupiansk at the moment, and has done a really good job there. So he was put in charge of the land forces because he had a really good reputation, fell on his own sword, which is like what any, I guess, decent, morally aligned manager should do. But is working as wonders, it appears, in Kupiansk, and people are clearly calling him a bit of a legend. And I think this is an attempt to say, look, he's better than Syrsky type thing. Now, against an enemy that's superior in almost all components, Drapati, who took a step back previously, has, where are we? Oh, right. So he's decided to resign after an accident in the training ground, taking responsibility for the failure of his charges to carry out his orders. Thank God they did not accept it. I think he did remove himself from that major position, but he's now in charge of, more operational areas. Unfortunately, I have not yet seen his name in any official report on the successes in the Kupiansk direction. It seems that he does not exist. Such a prick, kids, says someone. So anyway, it is true that Drapati's getting loads of props at the moment, and Syrskyi, there are lots of people. I could pick out loads of statements have been put on the socials at the moment from people within the Ukrainian armed forces and people without, saying Drapati needs to be put in charge of the whole armed forces and Syrskyi needs to go type thing. And this is apparently because the National Guard were responsible for this success in Kupiansk, and that those are the forces under the jurisdiction of Drapati, whereas the normal kind of regular armed forces are what Syrskyi is in charge of, so on and so forth. So there may be a little bit of a ruckus developing here as people are singing the praise of Drapati and kind of demanding that he gets put into a more senior position. Now, this is a very typical statement. I've seen this from a number of people. This is from Oliver Carroll, who is he writes for The Economist. For every Kupiansk, though, there is a Myrnarad and a Siversk. Ukraine's counterattack in the north has been successful, but things aren't looking so great elsewhere. Putting it very mildly, still, morale has an outsized role in war, and this is the first bit of good news for a while. Now, Andrew Perpetua then comes back and says, you should see the piles of Russian corpses up there. You might be totally shocked, but the kill ratio is not 2.5 to 1. And then he says, then someone says something else, which he replies, and now it's been deleted. He says, bro, where are you getting this info from? Yes, the situation's bad, but so this is a general response, by the way, to Oliver Carroll. Like, yeah, it's bad in Myrnarad and Siversk. He says, yes, the situation's bad, but you're downplaying Russian losses by a huge degree and now basically parroting Putin talking points. Has truth gone out to pasture or what? So a bit of a criticism of this position that, yeah, Kupiansk is going well, but everywhere else is pretty horrific for the Ukrainians. Andrew Perpetua, and he knows his stuff. He watches more videos of what's going on along the front lines than any other human probably in this war. He, at least from an OSINT point of view, he's saying, look, yeah, things are challenging, but actually the attrition rates, I mean, this is almost certainly true of Pokrovsk. So some people are saying, oh, it's horrific in Myrnarad and Pokrovsk, but actually, as much as troops might be quasi or practically encircled there, they are causing so many Russian deaths and casualties that this is a worthwhile situation for the Ukrainians. That's the argument. Anyway, situation in the Pokrovsk region, however, remains difficult, says Syrskyi himself. Quote, remain faithful to the tactics of active defense. This is about improving the operational position, conducting local operations to displace the enemy from certain territories and creating conditions for the next maneuvers. But there is an admission that, things are challenging. Then here we have the Euromaidan press sort of dooming a little bit. Russia claims it seized Siversk, or not dooming, actually coming back on a Russian claim, but things are tough in Siversk. So Siversk is north of Bakhmut and Chasiv Yar, but south of the Serebryansky forest and Crimea. So it's just in that area. Now, Russians have now claimed they've seized Siversk, but Ukrainian troops say the battles are ongoing, and even Russian bloggers cast doubt. Institute for the Study of War calls it cognitive warfare aimed at faking a collapsing front line. So maybe with the news coming out of Kupiansk and Pokrovsk being so very difficult for the Russians, they're trying to make these claims that they're succeeding elsewhere. And of course, that's what they did with Kupiansk and Pokrovsk itself, claiming that they had taken those two places, and yet one has been cleared by the Ukrainians, and the other, the Ukrainians are stubbornly hanging on and are treating the Russians to a huge degree. Where it's potentially, I mean, Siversk is still very difficult for the Ukrainians, and the Russians are, very challenging around that settlement, but also Hilaypolei. So Russians, again, Euromaidan press saying, have just crossed the river that was supposed to protect Hilaypolei in two places. The town anchors Ukraine's entire southeastern defensive line. Ukraine's 102nd Territorial Brigade is holding on outnumbered 5-1, with the elite 225th Assault Regiment rushing in to stop a collapse. Now, the 225th were up in the Sumy region, and they stopped the collapse up there. Now they're being brought down to the Halaypyr region, where the Russians have made these really significant gains over the last sort of 3 or 4 months. What else do we have? So GUR Special Forces showed exclusive footage of assaults in the cross direction in November. The tactical position, the units of the Security and Defense Forces of Ukraine, which hold the defense in the Pokrovsk-Minohrad agglomeration, has improved, or was improved, in November. Obviously, this is where there might well be push and shove. It's not a very clear and distinct line, single kind of defensive line there, where one side of the line the Ukrainians are hanging out and the other side the Russians are. It's very spongy. There are pockets of control from either side, within pockets of control from the other side. But as you can see here, pretty horrific urban warfare, as well as large areas of rural warfare too, and obviously drones playing a huge part. This is a 2-minute 10 video. You can go watch it till your heart's content at your leisure. But there are so many videos coming out of these really raw bits of footage of combat taking place right across the front line. Konstantinivka in the Donetsk region, what's left after ongoing Russian liberation. I laugh because it's horrific, but that's what the Russians call liberation. A once inhabited city is now scarred by destruction. I think that at one point it goes past being scarred. I mean, this is just outright destruction. You can talk about having your leg scarred, or you can talk about losing your leg, or having your leg battered to a pulp. And this is more like battered to a pulp. Urban areas like this, you're not living in those buildings again. They are having to be demolished after this war ends. And, you wonder whether they are going to just leave these cities to become like ghost towns. I mean, what do you do with them? Or do you just literally level entire neighbors? You level this entire city and then start again? But is it more difficult to do that? Or is it easier to just start again afresh on fields outside the city, and then work out what the hell to do with these kind of rubbleized areas? Anyway, that's Konstantinivka. Then we move on to see here a 40-kilometer stretch of the road from Izium to Sloviansk. I've been to Izium myself. It's been completely covered by anti-drone nets, or with anti-drone nets here. Hopefully they do a better job of elsewhere, where we've seen them collapse under the weight of snow and inclement conditions. Here, really important that the Ukrainians do their utmost to protect supply routes and keep supplies open to these places as long as possible. Now, here's a pretty startling bit of footage. This is a drone, a fairly significant drone, probably a Baba Yaga, Kupiansk here, an epic heavy bomb drop on Russians holed up in a private house. Now, this is a huge drone being dropped by a large drone. This is doing something. I mean, that looks like a very large, I don't know what that is, extra large mortar bomb or something. Anyway, this is what the Ukrainians need to be doing, which is, okay, we don't have the aviation that we would like in terms of jets to drop guided glide bombs. So what we can do is drop some serious payload from big Baba Yaga drones, where we still appear to have something of an advantage over the Russians. And that's clearly what they're doing to some degree. Now, I did a breaking news update on this yesterday. It's an AN-26 transport aircraft and 2 radars. Yeah, of course. Well done, music. You won that one. Damn it. Ow. So we have an AN-26 potentially full of troops getting hit by one of these drones. And then we have 2 radars that are apparently very expensive. Yeah, 2 expensive radar systems used for S-300, S-400 systems. So that's really good. Now, I played this yesterday, but I want to just remind you that this drone hit a plane that had 2 propellers going round. And apparently the fuselage is hot and the fuel tanks are hot, which means that this plane is likely, and it could be fluke, or it could be planned, I don't know. But if it's fluke, that's a nice bit of luck, because you've got a plane that all the indicators appear to show that this plane is just about to take off. And if you are a transport plane for military personnel and soldiers, and you're just about to take off with a full tank of fuel, then you're likely full of people as well. And so a hit like that could well have caused a really significant issue for the Russians. Right, Special Operations Forces have carried out destruction of enemy targets in the Donetsk region using FP2 drones. These are 200-kilometer, 105-kilogram warhead drones. In a cross direction, SSO destroyed 2 accumulation sites of enemy personnel and equipment, and the Avdiivka settlement, the destruction of an ammunition and fuel depot. So this is what we referred to earlier, but we've now got the drone footage of these strikes, and they are with FP2 drones. And that's exactly what I said earlier. You're starting to see these fairly significant drones be used on the front lines, and that, I think, is a very effective use of these drones. Now, this footage didn't really show you too much, but the assumption is that the 2 strikes, and there's already a strike that's taken place previously, but these strikes are on troop accumulations. You can't really tell much of what's happening here, but assuming that these drones are hitting exactly where they want to hit, then with a 105-kilogram warhead, this is going to cause the Russians something to think about. So yeah, anyway, the claim is that here we've got Avdiivka. This is an ammo depot that was hit, and then I think this is another troop accumulation there, but can't really tell from this what has taken place too much, and we have to go on the assertions of the Ukrainians themselves and what they are hitting. What else? A Russian drone took out an animal rescue van in Donetsk Oblast, injuring a dog inside. The team sheltered in the yard as drones circled overhead for hours. UA Animals runs weekly missions to evacuate pets from frontline areas. Over 9,000 pets have been rescued since Russia's full-scale invasion began. Sadly, two rescues and 2 animals were inside a van when it was hit. All of them survived, but the injured dog needed veterinary care. This is a second direct strike on UA Animals vehicles this year. Another rescue van was hit in February. Yeah, that's unconscionable in my books. Right. Andrew Perpetua gives us another insight. Frankly, he says, I think the fastest way to end the war in Ukraine is not by sending tanks or by idiotic peace proposals. The fastest way to set up factories across Europe to produce 1,000 to 2,000 long-range strike drones per day and launch hundreds, if not thousands, of drones into Russia every single day until the country collapses. If they think sending 500 drones into Ukraine is a threat, see how they respond to 3,000 drones when they fly into Russia. With this many drones, you can hammer every single factory, power plant, substation, or refinery and mine in Russia relentlessly. Europe had a 1 million drone program to supply 1 million FPV drones. Screw FPV drones, have a 1 million drone program to supply 1 million strike drones, FP2 drones. That's your 1 million drones. It would save Europe money too. Spending like 3 to 4 to 5 billion euros crushing Russia's infrastructure is a lot cheaper than spending tens of billions propping up Ukraine. I 100% agree with this. In fact, I 200% agree with this. I've been saying this for how long? How long have you heard me? I said right at the beginning of the war, Ukraine wins this war by distant strikes, and they need to just ramp up their drone and missile production. That includes cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, but it includes near-range and long-range drones. You build an absolute ton of these. I've said to you, how many times have I said to you that all of these weapons are game changers? Like the FP2 drone on its own is a game changer. It's an absolute game changer if you build enough of them. If you had 200 FP2 drones to send a night into the 200-kilometer range areas, you would absolutely obliterate Russia's forces. You would just obliterate their forces. Every troop accumulation would be hit. And then you'd wiped everything out to the point you'd be taking out single dugouts with 105-kilogram drones. This would be like the Russians with their guided glide bombs, but you'd be hitting with incredible precision with FP2 drones, just blitzing the Russian near rear. And at the same time, you're getting FP5s, FP7s, and FP9s, and Narwhal cruise missiles, and Storm Shadows, and Scale PGs, flinging them into Russia. And you're like, yeah, we're doing it. That's how you win a war. Now, unfortunately, it's come 2 years too late at the moment, but that Andrew Perpetua is absolutely right. And the reason I'm telling you he's right is because That's my view. It's been my view for bloody ages. And it's obvious, like, well done you. But yeah, it's pretty obvious. You don't win by sending troops in. And yes, you do need mobilized troops and well-trained troops that are well-equipped, right? Of course you do. But primarily, you're not going to attrit the Russian forces by sending your troops in, because you will lose your troops. If you're trying to take out 5,000 Russian troops from the 76th Air Assault Brigade, you're not going to do it with 1,000 Ukrainian troops. You're going to do that with Magyar's birds and FPV drones, but also Baba Yaga drones, but also FP2 drones, but also FP1 drones, but also FP5 drones, but also cruise and ballistic missiles. That's how you wipe out those bad boys. 100%. And then the snows of here, lots of news coming out from Russia of accidents. That's what we like. Don't know if it's got anything to do with the war, but it's not going to help the Russians, that's for sure. In the Orenburg district of Russia, a derailment to report. 3 wagons carrying propane butane near Tyulpan station. Authorities say no depressurization occurred and they can recover the fuel. No explanation was given for the accident, so it could well be sabotage. This could be strikes on the line, or who knows. But anyway, that's happened, and that's good for Ukraine. There's also a derailment in Penza region of Russia just before midday. A, quote, shunting locomotive of a freight train collided, causing several freight cars to derail at Chais station. No injuries are reported, but 3 other trains have been dispatched to clear up, to the cleanup. There are several network delays. So you can see quite a serious derailment taking place there. Involving locomotives. So yeah, that's good news for Ukraine. Right, okay, on to distant strikes. And last night was a very bad night for the Ukrainians in terms of a huge number of drones and missiles sent. Interception rates were okay, certainly in the context of drones, but missiles, quite a lot of ballistics were sent. So 465 drones were sent into Ukraine. 417 were taken out or intercepted. That's a 90% interception rate. That's pretty good for the Ukrainians. 16 Caliber cruise missiles, 9 were sent in, meaning 7 Caliber cruise missiles got through. 4 out of the 5 Iskander-K cruise missiles. So you've got 8 cruise missiles getting through. And then you've got none of the ballistics. So that's going to be Iskander-M or KN-23 and none of the Kinjals. 5 of the former, 4 of the latter. So 9 ballistic missiles sent in, none of them intercepted. So you got 9 ballistics, 8 cruise, and then you have, what is it, 65 minus 17, so 55, 48 drones there. 48 drones and a whole bunch of missiles. So that's going to be very painful for the Ukrainians. And indeed it was. The Air Force adds, though, that 6 of the missiles, so that's out of all of the both cruise and ballistics, didn't reach their targets. So this answers a question I had before, actually. So do you remember when they were showing the Khmelnytsky Starokonstantinov Air Base with these big craters of Kinjal missiles? And my question was, are these the missiles that have got through and not been intercepted, but they've blown up like a kilometer from the target? So that's the best interpretation of the data, would be that some of the missiles that get through still don't hit. So when you look at all of the missiles that are failed to be intercepted, then you can still hope that they didn't hit their targets and they can actually be quite wayward. Or are those included in the interception? Maybe it's the interception that made them fall a kilometer from the airbase. Well, here we have the best case scenario for Ukraine, which is great, which is to say that, yeah, we've intercepted these, but unfortunately, you've got 7, 8 cruise missiles and 9. So you've got 16 missiles getting through. However, 6 of them didn't reach their target. Okay, so that's only 10 missiles that got through and reached their target. So it's still bad. It's still 10 missiles, but that's a much better, I think, state of affairs than thinking all 16 missiles hit their target. Now, we've heard about these P1 Sun interceptor drones previously. Here we've got the claim that they've intercepted or destroyed more than 100 enemy drones. I presume, though, this is over time. This isn't last night. This is a montage of this particular drone taking out 100 enemy Shaheds. So these interceptor drones are becoming more and more prevalent as the days and weeks go by. Right. Flash Sehistenenko, I presume, is reporting that the enemy is looking for options for installing radio repeaters for Shaheds on the territory of Ukraine. Right, we understand that the Shaheds are they're hijacking the Ukrainian mobile telephone network to get around in Ukraine. We also heard the other night that there was a big circle of a Shahed drone that appeared to be acting as a repeater. It's got this huge diameter of a circle, so it's just flying around in Ukraine, being used to, I presume, as a repeater to then send its signal to all the other Shaheds so that they can go and be directed to their targets. Well, there's also this idea that the enemy could be looking to install just in the middle of a field. If they have collaborators working in Ukraine, if they can get hold of the right tech, go and establish this bit of kit in the corner of some fallow field that's going to be left for the next year. Yeah, we get a radio repeater there, then that will help our Shaheds do their business. So anyway, for this, they plan to choose private homes and elderly people. So not just the corner of fields, private homes and elderly people. The request will consist of installing a small box in the yard or house, which must be connected to an outlet and connected to the internet. So that's why it needs to be in the houses. So forget what I said about the corner of a field. This is using vulnerable people or people susceptible to, I don't know, bribing, blackmailing, having these receivers placed in their backyard. So okay, moving now onto the actual strikes last night. Is a huge strike on Odesa throughout the day and into last night. Mykolaiv as well was badly targeted, Kherson, Kryvyi Rih, Dnipro as well. So in Odesa, energy infrastructure was under attack. A large part of the city is without electricity and water. We'll come to that. Huge problems for Odesa. In Mykolaiv, critical and industry infrastructure were under attack. In Kryvyi Rih, Russia damaged high voltage lines, leading to the critical infrastructure facilities being without electricity. And in Dnipro, Russian strikes caused a fire in an unused building. Vehicles were damaged as well. In Nikopol, a bus caught fire from a Russian strike. 2 people were injured. So that's a bit of a synopsis, but it covers quite a lot of ground because actually each of those places, really badly affected. At night, Russia conducted a large attack on Odesa's energy infrastructure, including ports, gas facilities, and substations. All of Odesa is without power. Kherson also faces blackouts. Damage to 10 substations and a thermal plant were confirmed. In Mykolaiv, homes were also damaged. Here we have imagery coming from Odesa. It endured one of the most massive Russian airstrikes to date, air attacks damaging civilian energy and industrial infrastructure. Regional authorities are reporting most of the city is without heating and water. Preliminary reports say 2 people were injured and no fatalities have been confirmed. So I always find it amazing when you have these huge attacks and you get, oftentimes, not all the time, obviously, sometimes it's horrific, but oftentimes you do get very few casualties. And I think, really, wow, all of that destruction, you see all the rubble, you see all the fires, and actually people have been securing themselves sensibly in basements or in shelters or whatnot, or just the nature of some of these attacks, you get into your inside, what is it, you want to be, is it preferably 3 rooms back from the edge of an apartment block, or is it hiding under a threshold as well, the door, is that safer rather than have a ceiling collapse on you? Anyway, those sort of things, and then people can mitigate against the damage that is often done. There are many videos and photos of Odesa, says Tim White, main point of Russia's night and morning attack. It was 10:23 this morning that the air raid warning was finally switched off. At least 4 people seem to have been injured. No power or water in Odesa after that massive multi-missile and drone attack on the city and the wider region. Russia cynically says it targeted energy infrastructure, but houses, civilian buildings, and administrative building and warehouses of textiles are all in ruins. Over 1 million people in Ukraine are without power, including almost all of Odesa. Let's have a look at some of these pictures being released by the Ukrainian emergency services here, and you can see widespread destruction to Odesa. Over 1 million people without power and water. A children's hospital and car parts suffered minor damage in the city, while many more vehicles were destroyed as a projectile hit next to this building. As you can see, a number of vehicles on fire there. Just 2 casualties in Dnipropetrovsk, both in Nikopol from FPV drone attacks there. That's close enough to strike from across the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant reservoir, where Enerhodar, sorry, where there's that Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. They can send all sorts of munitions across that reservoir, including artillery, but yeah, FPV drones too. So places like Nikopol, Mahanets, they're always under attack there. Southern Dnipropetrovsk region and Kryvyi Rih, as we've mentioned, blackouts and massive attacks on those areas too, as well as Kharkiv as well to a degree. Now, here is evidence of what Russia has done to the energy infrastructure around Odesa. DTEK has released footage of one of the electrical substations in the Odesa region after the Russian attack. According to reports, 20 substations in the region have been damaged by Ukrainian strikes, further impacting local energy infrastructure. And this is where they need as much help as they can get with regard to equipment for substations being stockpiled, help from abroad, and have these teams that go to these places doing these incredible jobs, the unsung heroes often of the war, fixing back up energy infrastructure so that people and industry and commerce can have the energy they need. Right, Russian strike on Odesa left all traction substations in the city without power supplies. That's 20 damage in the region. These are really striking photos, possibly because of the moon there was last night. I hope that's not just AI, because they look absolutely striking. Russia makes large Ukrainian cities unlivable. This is genocide and war crimes. Millions of people are without light, water, hospitals, schools, and all in the wintertime as well. So very challenging. During the daytime yesterday, Russia hit Odesa with a ballistic missile that smacked into a Turkish ship, which is highly controversial. We'll speak about it in a second. But Turkish civilian ferry owned by Cenk Ro-Ro, so roll-on, roll-off ferries. These will carry trailers and trucks and whatnot. It's a Turkish civilian ferry owned by Cenk Ro-Ro. It had stopped in the Ukrainian port while en route from Karasu to Romania. It usually carries trucks and trailers. A commercial ship targeted by Russia was sailing under the flag of Panama, but is genuinely, definitely Turkish owned. The strike on a vessel came just hours after Putin and Erdogan held talks at an event in Ashgabat and then posed for a photo either side of the Turkmen leader. Now, this is pretty risky for the Russians. I talked about this in a live stream yesterday with Jonathan Fink, saying, I'm not sure this is a clever idea for the Russians to do this. They want to hit back at the shipping that's associated with Ukraine, because Ukraine has hit a number of tankers, both in the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, as well as port infrastructure in Novorossiysk recently. So this is probably part of that retribution, but it could be overstretched. If you're really going to incur the wrath of Erdogan and Turkey for blowing up one of their ships, one of the transporters that they own, then this really could be a whole can of worms for the Russians. Now, speaking of that ship, here we have imagery coming from the side of it. Civilian cargo ships on fire in the port after a Russian missile attack. According to reports, this is a Turkish Cenk T. Meanwhile, Putin and President Erdogan had a meeting today. They discussed the war in Ukraine, among other things. President Erdogan expressed his hope that the war would be over soon and said he was ready to support diplomatic initiatives aimed at a ceasefire and peace. And then we have the emergency services working to extinguish that fire on that ship last night. Really was quite a wide-scale fire, and probably lots of flammable batteries on board as well to boot, knowing that it's transferring energy equipment. So, yeah, emergency services currently working to extinguish that fire, apparently as a result of an Iskander-M strike. But yes, so glory to the heroes, I guess. Max 25 then says ceasefire on energy facilities and ports could lead to peace. That's Erdogan, what he said just before the Russians struck the port in Odesa, the port of Odesa, and that ship that was in that port. Like I said to you, he has to be careful, Putin. If he oversteps the mark, if there's a bit of overreach there, he's going to annoy people to the point of unifying against him. So he wants to hit and hurt Ukraine a lot, but not so much, not do something so horrific that it would completely unite the international public against him. So yeah, hitting that Turkish tanker, I think, is far too risky and should come back and bite him on the arse. But actually, then you hear a disappointingly dull statement from Turkey after one of its civilian ships was hit by Russia. I imagine Turkish crew on all their ships will be a little more nervous after these words. So the Turkish come out and say, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated regarding the attack on Ukraine's Chornomorsk ports, quote, the spread of the war to the Black Sea indicates the legitimacy of our concerns regarding maritime security and freedom of navigation. But then really stops short of going to town on Russia, which is kind of what I think we should want from the Turkish here. Now, Russia attacked a sports school in Shostka in Sumy. Shostka gets an absolute pasting very often, very close to the border up there in the north. Thankfully, all the kids and coaches are alive. Russians also carried out mortar shelling of the Seredina Buda community in Shostka district, injuring a 76-year-old woman. And then finally, for this section of what Russia's achieved, they destroyed a gas station, a petrol station near Kharkiv with a drone. The enemy attacked a gas station in Pavlovka. 6 people were injured to varying degrees and suffered acute stress reactions. 62-year-old gas station employee is in serious condition. Okay, so I think the Ukrainians took a bit of a beating last night in terms of their energy infrastructure. That's one of the main areas of that's one of the main variables in a pressure cooker that I keep talking about that the Ukrainians have to contend with. Their personnel, lack of personnel, and their the pressure, undue pressure being put on them to do a hasty peace negotiation or peace plan, sign up to that. I think that's one of the variables, but energy infrastructure getting shellacked on a nightly basis is a real vulnerability that the Ukrainians have. So last night is a seriously challenging night for the Ukrainians. On the other hand, they did some of their own strikes, but we don't have too much information yet again, although looking at the drone bomber map last night, far fewer drones were sent by the Ukrainians last night than certainly 3 nights ago and maybe even 2 nights ago. But Saratov was struck, and that is a major refinery there. They have a problem with drones at Saratov, said Tim White last night. Saratov refinery has been under attack for a while. It's been hit before, of course, and only recently resumed near capacity work, awaiting confirmation, but it looks like Ukraine scored another hit. This is what Ukraine do so often, which is take out a facility like a refinery. Russians then have to work hammer and tongs to fix it back up in record time, and then they just get hit again. It's reported a drone struck before the alarm was sounded. Nothing further is known yet. Oh, that's in Dnipro, sorry. That was a Russian drone. So, but anyway, the Russians getting hit in Saratov. Looks like a refinery took a pasting. We have Saratov and Rososh Voronezh region. Local residents report an attack on the JSC Minudobrania, a plant owned by Rotenberg's Roshkim holding company. The plant produces ammonia, nitric acid, and other substances used in the production of explosives and ammunition. Ammonia, of course, going to be used, I would have thought, for the fertilizer industry as well. So it's a really important place to take out. Saratov, there are more videos of Saratov as well. I think this was supposed to be another video, but it's actually a previous. Anyway, I thought I had more lined up for Saratov. But moving on. Attack reported overnight, as mentioned, on the Rososh fertilizer plant in Voronezh region owned by Rotenberg's Roshkim, producing ammonia and materials for explosives, as we heard, but with a 1.2 million ton annual capacity there. So this is a pretty sizable chemicals plant that's been hit. And then yesterday, I think daytime, this was evident. Yeah. Another city in Russia where an interesting fire was spotted. I have no idea if this has anything to do with drones or missiles, but a Tumen facility is seriously on fire. It may not be from a Ukrainian strike, but it's near the combined heat and power station, says Tim White. A fuel tank is thought to have burst into flames. It's used to fire boilers and keep the turbines working. So yeah, could be something to do with strikes. If not, happy coincidence. Spoo drones again hit oil production platforms in the Caspian Sea. Now, this was from yesterday. I presume this is referring to what took place the 2 nights prior. Drones attacked the Filanovsky oil production platform. Oh no, for the second time in a week. No, this is the second time yesterday. Wow. In addition, another platform was hit in Korchagin. I hadn't read I hadn't read that. Sorry, I'd skimmed over that. Drones damaged critical equipment on both ice-resistant platforms, which led to the suspension of the production process. This is very, very significant. We heard that actually the first strike a few nights back had really, called into question 20 wells that were connected to these, I believe, but I'm not sure how up to date that information is. But the initial claim was that 20 wells had been stopped from producing hydrocarbons. But yeah, again, would need to verify that claim. Right, what else? I talked about this already. So 2 nights ago, the Slavneft Yanos oil refinery in Yaroslavl was hit, causing explosions there. Ammo depot near Avdiivka and troop concentrations in Murmansk and Radinska. Right, this doesn't surprise me at all, by the way, but it's very interesting. So Trump doesn't like to be constrained by other people, I guess, but he likes to align himself with major dictators of the world. But if he is going to do something, if you were to compare the Trump administration, say, to the Biden administration, one thing the Biden administration was very cautious. Now, if Trump, just from his own character, but also possibly if he's got dementia, caution goes out the window. So if he does have cognitive issues and he's asked, well, do you have a problem with the Ukrainians taking out Russian shadow tankers? He's going to be like, yeah, go for it. Like, if you're going to do it, do it. Like, if you're going to have war, go to war. But also, he's just boarded a shadow fleet tanker, a Venezuelan shadow fleet tanker in the Caribbean. So he's going to be like, yeah, shadow fleet tanker is a fair game, because I can't really say you can't hit them if we're going and doing this to Venezuelans. So yeah, go for it. So this is really, really fascinating. It is arguably very different to how the Biden administration would have reacted. So Trump gave Ukraine the green light to strike the Russian shadow fleet, according to a piece in The Atlantic. If under Joe Biden, the American side feared escalation and opposed attacks on Russian ships in international waters, then with the advent of Donald Trump, the approach has changed. In particular, he objected to strikes on tankers in international waters, and in a number of cases approved the transfer of intelligence to Kyiv, which was used to damage Russian oil infrastructure. So it's very interesting. Of course, though, Trump is also going to be transactional, which is if Russia is struggling to transport oil and gas, then okay, that's going to hurt Russia, but it's actually going to allow the US to sell more oil and gas by replacing what Russia cannot sell themselves. Now, Russian industry, according to Militiani, is unable to replenish anti-aircraft missile stocks in a timely manner due to Ukraine's massive use of cheap drones. And by this, I'm pretty sure they mean like the FP1s and FP2s and the Lyutis and whatnot. They're not hugely cheap, but comparatively, compared to, say, well, maybe the air defense missiles, but also, other drones that might be used and cruise missiles and whatnot by foreign nations, these are relatively cheap. But it looks like the Russians, and this is what the Russians have been doing to Ukraine, right? Sending over gajillions of Shaheds so that Ukraine uses up their very expensive air defense missiles. And then either runs out, or it's just costing them inordinate amounts of money, or their allies. Problems are primarily related to the shortage of microelectronics, dependence on imported components, and a limited number of enterprises, says Militiani. So that's good news for Ukraine. Right, now on to the final stretch here. Sorry, I've been going on for a very long time. Okay, we're going to start with the economy. Very poor metallurgy data from Russia. Pipe production is down hugely, 19% year on year from January to November. And then November comes along, that's 30% down year on year. So Russia is an oil and gas producer. So this decline in pipes, in making pipes, is a bad sign. Furthermore, given the widespread deterioration of utility networks, there will be many accidents. Iron ore down, bulk dry coke is down, pig iron is down, steel is down, finished rolled products are down, pipes are down. Second year of decline in Russian metallurgy. So that's a compound issue. It's not just worse than last year, which it is, but last year was worse than previous years. So, you're compounding the issues here. Maria Drutska says more signs that things are going far worse inside Russia than they are willing to admit. An emergency decree has been issued last week in St. Petersburg that all sales of flammable liquids or gasoline are to be, or gas, probably, I don't know if that's petrol or actual gas, are to be reported immediately due to an increase in arson attacks. Shades of 1917 going on there. Wow. So that's a signal that there is quite a bit of sabotage going on and people are buying flammable things to set fire to stuff. Okay. Max25 says, with reference to Reuters, the Reuters article is exclusive. Russia's oil and gas revenue has been seen to halve in December to the lowest since August 2020. So Russian state oil and gas revenue likely to almost halve in December compared to with a year ago. $5.17 billion as a result of lower crude oil prices and a stronger ruble, according to Reuters. Now, Jürgen Naudit makes a comment that some of you made in the threads when I reported that these young German student journalists did some OSINT work and mapped out these drones that have been hassling infrastructure around the Kiel Canal. They mapped them to go back to these 3 Russian commercial ships back in the sea, right? And therefore are joining the dots and showing that the Russians are responsible for this drone activity. Certainly in this context, 7 German journalism students tracked Russian crude freighters lurking off the Dutch and German coast and connected them to drone swarms over military bases. Now, Jürgen Naudit asks absolutely justifiably, why couldn't NATO or the German military do this? NATO and the German military are failing miserably due to bureaucracy and inertia. With billions in budgets and high-tech equipment, they overlook obvious threats like Russian spy ships off their own coast launching drones over bases. Instead, they offer superficial inspections, bureaucratic obstacles, and a lack of OSINT use. A scandal that jeopardizes Europe's security. The 7 journalism students deserve the highest of praise. With cleverness, courage, and innovative methods like AIS tracking and drone overflights, they uncover in weeks what professionals ignore for months. They prove that persistence and creativity are more effective than overfunded institutions. Heroes of investigative journalism. I don't disagree, to be honest. Very good stuff there from them. Now, Germany has summoned the Russian envoy over a surge in cyber attacks. The foreign ministry has summoned the Russian ambassador and said there'll be consequences for hybrid attacks backed by the government in Moscow aimed at undermining democracy. That is according to Bloomberg. And what I've been talking about for ages, and sorry to repeat myself, is that our media sites our mainstream media sites in Europe and America, and we're going to go to America here, and I'm going to talk about Fox News, need to be shouting from the rafters that Russia is attacking us, and they're doing this frequently, and it's Russian drones that are doing this, and it's Russian cyber attacks that are doing that. And that's why we're funding our defense, and that's why we're supporting Ukraine. Russia are attacking us. We are at war with Russia. They have declared war on us. And I say that Fox News need to be repeating what the propagandists on television are saying, and the horrendous things they say about sort of American politicians and whatnot, and the horrendous things they say about Ukraine and about, drowning children and burning, throwing them into burning houses and whatnot, like they said earlier on in the war. If they replay that to their audiences, then their audiences are going to know that the Russians aren't the good guys here. Now, Adam Cochran, well, first of all, Michael Weiss, the US has unsealed a California grand jury indictment exposing how Russian GRU hackers targeted critical infrastructure in the US. They hit a regional airport in Missouri, drinking water and water storage facilities in Texas, Pennsylvania, and Indiana, and a meat packing facility in California. One cyber attack caused 200,000 gallons of water to overflow in Texas. Another caused 2,000 pounds of meat to spoil. One of the hackers is here. She could run for Congress in Florida when this thing blows over. I mean, this needs to be shouted about so that people understand what Russia is doing to our countries, particularly the United States. Russian state hackers, not just state-backed, but direct employees of the Russian government, hacking US infrastructure. This is who Trump is siding with on Ukraine. This is who Trump is loosening sanctions on. People actively trying to harm America, says Adam Cochran. Yes, that needs to be communicated massively. And here we have an example of this in the UK. Now, this video is already too long, but this is part of what she said. I want to play you the whole thing. But anyway, quote on BBC Newsnight, "We have to get very serious in recognizing the threat. One of the key talk show hosts came out on Russian television saying we need to assassinate European leaders." Yes, talk about to the general public what Russian propagandists are saying. Talk about what Russian cyber attackers are doing to our infrastructure. We need to talk about this much more openly. Now, bad news is that Rustem Umerov, now used to be the defense minister, now on the National Security Council. He's involved in all of these talks with the Americans. He has not been returning to Ukraine, and many people are saying, we think, rumors have been swirling that Rustem Umerov is involved in the Energoatom Mindich tapes scandal. And that's why he's not coming back to Ukraine and he's staying abroad doing all this diplomacy. Well, it turns out that he's been talking with the FBI in America. Ukrainian officials reportedly met secretly with the FBI director multiple times in Miami to discuss the American peace plan and national security issues. The Ukrainian ambassador's office confirmed the meeting, saying they focused on security cooperation. But actually, some people are now saying these secret meetings with the FBI might have been to do with Rustem Umerov. And you need to just have a little... we need to be aware that Rustem Umerov is looking like he is implicated in a Mindich tape scandal, and that would be a huge problem for Ukraine's PR, because you've already had justice, energy minister and justice ministers being taken in, and then you've had Andriy Yermak, and now it could be Rustem Umerov as well. Those rumors have been circling for ages, but it looks like that is now coming to fruition. And I'm going to leave you with a bit of bad news. Unfortunately, the International Olympic Committee has approved Russian and Belarusian youth athletes to compete under national flags at international events, including the 2026 Youth Olympic Games. In the meantime, Russia continues bombing Ukraine and killing civilians. Sports is not above geopolitics or human suffering. Wow, sad news there. Anyway, that's enough from me. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to go to atpgeo.com/donate. We have a shared fundraiser with Silicon Curtain and Jonathan Fink there. We have raised an awesome, just seeing the latest, almost 11,000. That hasn't moved from since yesterday. So if you can help us with that, that will be absolutely phenomenal. And if we can get that done by Christmas, it would be absolutely brilliant. So that is the Jigaspur 80th Air Assault Brigade support there for all-terrain vehicles. So thank you very much for your support here. Really appreciate it. Take care and I'll speak soon.